Welcome to English POC by V. I'm your host, John. Today, we're exploring a topic that touches everyone, especially those in creative fields: self-doubt. With me is the wonderfully talented artist and writer, Emily, who's here to share her journey and insights. Emily, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for inviting me, John. I'm excited to chat about this.
Let's jump right in. Self-doubt is something that almost every creative person experiences at some point. Can you start by sharing a time when self-doubt really affected you and your work?
Shares a detailed personal story, possibly about an early project where self-doubt almost made her give up.
That's so relatable, Emily. I think many listeners have felt that same kind of pressure, whether they're artists, writers, or in other creative fields. When you were in that moment, what were the thoughts running through your head, and how did they affect your work?
Discusses the internal dialogue and how it impacted her creative process, perhaps leading to procrastination, perfectionism, or even abandoning projects.
It's tough when that inner critic gets loud. But obviously, you found ways to move past it. What were some of the first steps you took to overcome those feelings and keep creating?
Shares initial strategies she used, such as setting smaller goals, seeking feedback from trusted peers, or simply pushing herself to create despite the doubt.
Those are great strategies. I want to dive deeper into this idea of pushing through. Sometimes the hardest part is just starting. What would you say to someone who's stuck in that phase of not being able to start because they're paralyzed by self-doubt?
Gives practical advice on overcoming the fear of starting, perhaps by focusing on the process rather than the outcome, or breaking down the project into more manageable tasks.
That's really practical advice. Shifting gears a bit, creativity can be so deeply personal, and I think that's what makes self-doubt so challenging. How do you balance that vulnerability with the confidence needed to share your work with the world?
Shares how she learned to embrace vulnerability, possibly through practice, receiving constructive criticism, or learning to separate herself from her work.
That's a powerful mindset. Let's talk about the role of external influences. We all know that feedback, both positive and negative, can have a huge impact. How do you manage feedback without letting it derail your creative confidence?
Discusses how she processes feedback, the importance of filtering it through her own creative vision, and how she uses it to improve without losing confidence.
Feedback is definitely a double-edged sword. Along those lines, have you ever had a moment where feedback, or maybe even a lack of it, really hit your self-confidence? How did you handle that?
Shares a story about receiving harsh criticism or not getting the response she hoped for, and how she navigated those feelings.
That's such a common experience. I think what's important, and what you've touched on, is learning from those experiences and continuing to grow. Speaking of growth, let's talk about how self-doubt can sometimes actually fuel creativity. Have you ever found that your doubts led you to push boundaries or think differently in your work?
Explores how self-doubt can sometimes lead to breakthroughs, pushing her to refine ideas or explore new creative territories.
That's an interesting perspective, using doubt as a tool for growth rather than just an obstacle. It's all about mindset, isn't it? What would you say has been the biggest shift in your mindset over the years that's helped you deal with self-doubt more effectively?
Discusses a major shift in her perspective, such as learning to accept imperfection, understanding that doubt is part of the process, or finding joy in the act of creating itself.
That's really insightful, Emily. As we start to wrap up, I'd love to hear about any practices or routines you've developed that help you stay grounded and confident in your creativity, even on tough days.
Shares her daily or weekly routines, such as journaling, meditation, taking breaks, or setting specific creative goals that help her maintain confidence.
Those are fantastic practices. I'm sure our listeners will find them helpful. Before we close, what final thoughts or advice would you give to someone who's in the thick of self-doubt right now and struggling to see a way forward?
Offers a final piece of advice, perhaps emphasizing persistence, the importance of community, or the value of self-compassion.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your journey and wisdom with us today. It's been really inspiring to hear how you've navigated self-doubt and continued to create amazing work. I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a lot of valuable insights.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks again, Emily, and thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Unscripted Conversations. If you found today's discussion helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Join us next time for more inspiring conversations that are sure to spark your creativity.